I exposed my wife's double life. Her affair was just the start. Hello, read it. My name is Nathan Harper. I'm 38 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've prided myself on living a quiet, steady life. I wasn't looking for grand adventure or drama, just a sense of purpose and stability. I thought I'd found that in my wife, Allison. She was my anchor, my partner in crime, the person I planned to grow old with. Together, we built what I thought was a strong foundation for a family. We had two beautiful kids, an 11-year-old son, Ethan, and a 7-year-old daughter, Lily. If you'd asked me 6 months ago, I would have said we were happy. Not perfect, what marriage is, but solid. Now, I can barely recognize the life I used to call my own. Looking back, the signs were there. They always are, aren't they? But they were subtle, scattered like breadcrumbs too small to notice until they led me straight into a nightmare. Allison and I met in our 20s. She was the kind of person people gravitate toward, with an energy that made her the life of every room she entered. I was more grounded, quiet, practical, focused on building a stable future. Maybe that's why we worked so well together, or so I thought. Where I saw a balance, she might have seen stagnation. But I didn't realize that at the time. I was too busy working long hours to provide for our family, too wrapped up in the day-to-day grind to see how far apart we were drifting. The changes started small. Allison had always been social, but in the past year, her calendar seemed to fill up with a constant stream of work events and girls' nights. She took up running, something she'd never expressed interest in before, and started leaving early on Saturday mornings for long jogs at a nearby park. I was proud of her for prioritizing her health, even though it meant less time together as a family. When she bought herself an expensive gym membership, I didn't think much of it. Self-care, she called it, and I agreed she deserved it. After all, she worked hard too, juggling part-time freelance work with the demands of parenting. But then there were the other changes. The guarded way she started checking her phone. The way her laughter seemed a little too forced when we were alone. She became less interested in the little things we used to do together. Movie nights, lazy Sunday mornings, even just catching up over coffee. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. People go through ups and downs, right? It wasn't until I noticed the growing distance in her eyes that I began to feel the first pangs of unease. Still, I didn't want to make something out of nothing. I had no reason to doubt her. At least, that's what I told myself. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It gnawed at me, a quiet but persistent whisper that I tried to silence by focusing on work and the kids. I wanted to believe that if I just gave it time, everything would go back to normal. Then, on a quiet Sunday night, everything changed. Allison had gone out, saying she was meeting a friend for dinner. I didn't question it. Why would I? The kids were already in bed, and I was sitting in the living room catching up on emails when the notification pinged. It was an email from an address I didn't recognize, with no subject line. Normally, I would have ignored something like that, assuming it was spam, but something about it felt off. I opened it, and what I found inside turned my stomach. The email was short, almost clinical, but attached to it were screenshots, text messages, photos, and call logs that left no room for doubt. There were intimate exchanges between Allison and another man, someone I didn't recognize. The messages spoke of love, of secret plans, of nights spent together in hotels while I was home with the kids. One photo was particularly damning. Allison, smiling in the arms of this stranger, standing in front of a restaurant she had once told me was too expensive for us to try. The image felt like a slap in the face, a cruel confirmation of what I had been too blind, or too trusting, to see. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. At first, I tried to convince myself it was some kind of mistake. Maybe the email was fake, an elaborate prank. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. One of the photos included a scrap of paper with Allison's handwriting on it, a grocery list written on the back of an old receipt. There was no denying it. I didn't confront her that night. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in the dark, scrolling through the screenshots over and over, as if staring at them might somehow reveal a hidden explanation that didn't shatter my entire world. My thoughts were a chaotic blur of anger, heartbreak, and disbelief. How long had this been going on? Why would she do this? Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? I spent the next week walking around in a fog. I went to work, smiled at my coworkers, and tucked the kids in at night like nothing had changed. But everything had. I felt like a stranger in my own life, haunted by questions I couldn't answer. Meanwhile, Allison went on as though nothing was wrong. She laughed with the kids, kissed me goodnight, and even asked how my day had been. The normalcy was unbearable. Every word she said felt like another lie, every smile like a cruel reminder of what she had taken from me. And yet, I still couldn't bring myself to confront her. Not yet. I needed answers first. I needed to know how deep the betrayal went, how long it had been festering under the surface of our lives. So I started digging. I combed through phone records, bank statements, and social media accounts, piecing together a timeline of her deceit. The more I found, the more I felt my grip on reality slipping. This wasn't just a fling, it was a full-blown affair. There were weekend getaways I thought had been work trips, dinners that had been girls' nights, and gifts I assumed were for her friends or clients. But the more I uncovered, the more questions I had. One in particular haunted me. Who sent the email? Was it someone trying to help me, or someone trying to hurt her? And why now? The timing felt deliberate, as though whoever it was wanted to rip my life apart at the seams. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just an affair. What I didn't know at the time was that I was right. This was only the beginning. The days after discovering the email passed in a blur, each one heavier than the last. I went through the motions of my life as though nothing had changed, but inside, I was unraveling. Every time I looked at Allison, I felt like I was staring at a stranger, a person I thought I knew but now couldn't trust. I became hyper-aware of every word she spoke, every movement she made, searching for hidden meanings or signs of guilt. But Allison didn't falter. She carried on as though everything was fine, her laughter ringing through the house, her smile warm and familiar. It was maddening. Part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, but another part of me hesitated. I didn't know what I would do if she admitted it, if she confirmed that everything I'd built with her was a lie. So instead, I stayed silent and kept digging, driven by an obsessive need to uncover the full truth. The first thing I did was look up the man in the email. His name was Ian Matthews, a name that meant nothing to me. A quick search revealed he lived in the same city, worked as a sales executive for some tech company, and, judging by his online presence, seemed to have a penchant for flashy cars and weekend trips to the coast. He looked younger than me, maybe mid-30s, with the kind of polished charm that screamed overconfidence. I hated him instantly. What unnerved me most, though, was how carefully he seemed to keep his life curated online. His social media accounts were spotless, almost as though he had something to hide. I couldn't find any photos of him with Allison, no comments that might hint at their connection. The only link between them was the evidence in the email, texts and photos that someone else had deliberately sent to me. That question, who sent it, was starting to gnaw at me even more than the affair itself. It was like trying to solve a riddle with missing pieces. Did Ian have a jealous ex? Did Allison? Was it a colleague who'd stumbled across their secret and decided to intervene? The possibilities swirled in my mind, each one more unsettling than the last. Whoever it was, they clearly wanted to blow up my life, and they were succeeding. As I dug deeper, I began to notice other details that didn't sit right. Bank statements showed charges I couldn't explain, expensive dinners, boutique hotel stays, even jewelry I'd never seen Allison wear. The dates aligned with her work trips and girls' nights. It was all so brazen, so calculated. And yet, she came home every night and acted like nothing was wrong. How could someone be so good at pretending? But what disturbed me most wasn't the evidence. It was the realization of how easily I had overlooked it all. I had trusted her implicitly, never questioning where she went or what she did. That trust had blinded me, made me complicit in my own betrayal. I felt like a fool, a man who had let his own complacency destroy his family. One night, after the kids were asleep, I sat at the dining room table with all the evidence spread out in front of me. Printouts of the email, bank statements, photos, and even a log of her text messages that I'd managed to pull from our phone records. I stared at it all, trying to make sense of it, but the more I looked, the more overwhelming it became. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a second life, a hidden world that Allison had built right under my nose. I began to feel like a stranger in my own home. Every room seemed to hold a memory that was now tainted by doubt. The couch where we'd spent lazy Sunday afternoons watching movies. The kitchen where she used to dance while cooking dinner. Even our bedroom felt like a stage set, a place where the facade of our marriage had played out night after night. I couldn't escape the suffocating weight of it all. Then, something unexpected happened. It was a Thursday evening, and I was sitting in my car in the driveway, too drained to go inside. I had spent the day obsessing over Ian Matthews, trying to find some kind of leverage, some piece of information that might explain why this was happening. That's when I noticed the envelope. It was tucked under the windshield wiper, plain and unmarked. My heart pounded as I opened it, half expecting another batch of damning photos or texts. But this time, there was no email, no screenshots, just a single piece of paper with 2 words scrawled across it. Follow her. At first, I didn't know what to think. Was this some kind of sick joke? Another cruel twist from whoever had sent the original email? But as I sat there staring at those 2 words, a strange sense of clarity washed over me. I had been so focused on digging through the past, on uncovering what had already happened, that I hadn't stopped to consider what might still be happening. If Allison was still seeing Ian, there was a chance I could catch them in the act. The thought made my stomach turn, but I knew I couldn't ignore it. I needed closure, something concrete that would force me to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. So the next morning, I took the note's advice. I told Allison I had an early meeting at work and left the house before she did, parking a few blocks away where I could watch our driveway without being seen. When she left an hour later, I followed her. What happened next was like something out of a bad movie. She drove to a cafe on the other side of town, where she met a woman I didn't recognize. They sat by the window, talking and laughing, but nothing about their interaction seemed romantic. For a moment, I wondered if I had been wrong, if maybe this was just a harmless meeting with a friend. But then Allison handed the woman an envelope, her expression serious. The woman nodded, took the envelope, and left without finishing her coffee. I stayed parked across the street, my heart pounding. What had just happened? Was this connected to the affair, or was it something else entirely? The questions were piling up faster than I could answer them, and the more I tried to make sense of it, the more tangled it all became. All I knew was that I was no closer to the truth than when I started. And yet, for the first time, I felt a glimmer of something I hadn't felt in weeks: determination. I wasn't going to let this destroy me. Not without a fight. The cafe meeting lingered in my mind like a splinter I couldn't remove. It should have given me some clarity, but instead, it only deepened the mystery. Who was the woman? What was in the envelope Allison handed her? Was it connected to Ian, or was there another layer to this mess I hadn't even begun to uncover? I sat in my car for nearly an hour after Allison left, replaying the scene over and over in my mind, searching for some hidden meaning. Eventually, I followed her home. She was already inside by the time I arrived, bustling around the kitchen as though nothing had happened. I watched her through the window from the driveway, a strange mix of emotions bubbling inside me. Anger, sadness, betrayal, and something else I couldn't quite name. She looked so normal, so familiar, that for a moment I almost convinced myself to let it go. To walk inside, pretend everything was fine, and sink back into the illusion of our life together. But I couldn't. Not after everything I'd seen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with possibilities. I kept thinking about the note: follow her. Someone out there knew more than I did. Someone who was actively pushing me to uncover the truth. But who? And why? The idea of some faceless stranger orchestrating this from the shadows made my skin crawl. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that they were helping me, even if their motives were unclear. By morning, I had made a decision. I needed to find out who that woman was and what role she played in all of this. Waiting for answers to fall into my lap wasn't going to cut it anymore. If I wanted the truth, I was going to have to go after it myself. I called in sick to work and drove back to the cafe, hoping to find something, anything, that could point me in the right direction. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe the woman would show up again. or maybe someone at the cafe would recognize her. It felt like a long shot, but at this point, I was willing to grasp at straws. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, the mid-morning rush having already passed. I ordered a coffee I didn't want and took a seat by the window, pretending to scroll through my phone while my eyes scanned the room. After about 20 minutes, I saw my chance. The barista, a young guy who looked barely out of college, walked past my table, and I flagged him down. I started with casual questions, asking if the cafe was always this quiet and if they had regular customers. He seemed eager to chat, probably bored out of his mind. And before long, I steered the conversation toward the woman Allison had met. "I think I saw her here a few days ago," I said, describing her as best I could. "Short, dark hair, kind of serious looking. Do you know her?" His expression changed slightly, hesitation, maybe recognition, but he recovered quickly. "Oh yeah, she comes in sometimes," he said with a shrug. "I don't know her name, though. Sorry." It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. Whoever she was a real person with some kind of connection to Allison. And if she came to the cafe regularly, there was a chance I could catch her again. For the next few days, I became a man obsessed. I spent every spare moment staking out the cafe, sitting by the window with a laptop or a book, pretending to be just another customer. It felt ridiculous, like something out of a bad detective movie, but I didn't care. I needed answers, and this was the only lead I had. On the third day, my patience paid off. She walked in just after noon, her dark hair pulled back into a neat ponytail, her expression as serious as I remembered. My heart pounded as I watched her order a coffee and sit down at a table near the back. She pulled out a notebook and started writing, her pen moving quickly across the page. I debated approaching her, but something held me back. What would I even say? "Hi, I'm the husband of the woman you met the other day. Care to explain what's going on?" No, I needed to be smarter than that. Instead, I waited until she got up to leave, slipping out of the cafe a few steps behind her. She didn't drive, which worked in my favor. I followed her on foot, keeping a safe distance as she made her way through the city. My heart raced with every step, my mind spinning with possibilities. Was she meeting Ian? Was she heading to some secret rendezvous with Allison? Or was this about something else entirely? After about 20 minutes, she stopped in front of an office building, a nondescript place with tinted windows and no signage to indicate what kind of business it housed. She disappeared inside, leaving me standing on the sidewalk, unsure of what to do next. I couldn't follow her in without drawing attention to myself, but I wasn't ready to walk away either. I circled the block a few times, trying to get a sense of the building. There was a small parking lot in the back, mostly empty, and a side door marked employees only. I jotted down the address, deciding to look it up later. For now, I had done enough. I had a new lead, and that was more than I'd had yesterday. When I got home that evening, Allison was in the kitchen, helping Ethan with his homework while Lily colored at the table. It was such a normal, wholesome scene that for a moment I felt like I was living in two separate worlds. One where my wife was the loving mother of my children, and another where she was tangled up in something I couldn't yet fully comprehend. I wanted to confront her so badly. The words burned in my throat, threatening to spill out every time she looked at me. But I held back, telling myself I needed more. More proof, more answers, more certainty. Because once I opened that door, there would be no going back. That night, I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else had gone to bed, staring at the address I had written down. I didn't know what I would find, but I was determined to keep digging. Something was happening, something bigger than just an affair, and I was going to find out what it was. What I didn't realize was how far down the rabbit hole this would take me, or how much I would lose along the way. The address haunted me. For days, I couldn't stop thinking about that unmarked office building and the woman who had walked inside. Every time I looked at Allison, I felt the weight of my unanswered questions pressing down on me, making it harder and harder to act normal. I was torn between the need to confront her and the fear of what I might uncover if I did. The truth felt like a loaded gun, and I wasn't sure I was ready to pull the trigger. I knew I couldn't sit still anymore. The longer I waited, the worse it felt, like a sickness spreading through my body. So one evening, after tucking Ethan and Lily into bed, I grabbed my laptop and started digging into the address. At first, I didn't find much, just a generic listing for the building with no mention of the businesses inside. But after some deeper searches, I stumbled across a forum post that mentioned it in passing, describing it as a discreet office for specialized consulting. Specialized consulting. The phrase felt deliberately vague, almost like it was meant to deflect attention. I kept searching, my curiosity growing by the minute, and eventually I found an old job posting for one of the businesses in the building. The description was just as cryptic as the forum post, but a single phrase stood out to me. Client discretion is our top priority. It didn't take a genius to read between the lines. Whatever was happening in that building, it wasn't the kind of thing they wanted advertised. The realization sent a chill down my spine. Was this where Allison's secrets were hiding? And if so, what kind of specialized consulting was she involved in? I couldn't stop myself. The next morning, after dropping the kids off at school, I drove to the building. My heart pounded as I parked across the street, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. For a few minutes, I just sat there trying to work up the courage to go inside. But no matter how much I told myself I needed answers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a line I might not be able to come back from. Eventually, I settled on a compromise. Instead of going in, I decided to wait and watch. Maybe I'd see the woman again, or even Allison. Either way, I figured it was better to observe from a distance than to charge in blindly. So I stayed in my car, keeping my eyes glued to the entrance. Hours passed. I watched people come and go, most of them ordinary-looking men and women in business attire. A few stood out, people who seemed nervous, glancing around like they didn't want to be seen. But none of them were Allison or the woman from the cafe. Just as I was about to give up and leave, something caught my attention. A man exiting the building, his face partially obscured by a baseball cap. He was tall, with a confident stride that felt eerily familiar. Ian Matthews. I couldn't believe it. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I watched him walk to his car, a sleek black SUV that matched the persona he projected online. This wasn't a coincidence. Ian was connected to this place, and by extension, so was Allison. The sight of him sent a fresh wave of anger coursing through me, but it also gave me a strange sense of validation. I wasn't crazy. The pieces were starting to come together. But what did it mean? Was this just where they met in secret, or was there something more going on? The questions swirled in my mind as I watched Ian drive away, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and determination. I knew I had to find out more, but I also knew I couldn't do it alone. That night, I reached out to an old friend, Mark. We'd been close in college, but over the years, we'd drifted apart. Mark worked in cybersecurity, and if anyone could help me dig deeper without leaving a trail, it was him. I felt a pang of guilt as I typed out the message, knowing I was dragging him into something messy, but I didn't see any other option. To my surprise, Mark responded almost immediately. He didn't ask too many questions, just told me to send him what I had and that he'd see what he could do. Within hours, he was texting me back with updates. That building's tied to some private mediation and consulting firm, he said. High-end stuff. They don't advertise, and they don't take walk-ins. Looks like their clients are mostly wealthy individuals or corporations trying to keep things under wraps. Think legal disputes, asset division, that kind of thing. Asset division. The phrase hit me like a punch to the gut. Was Allison planning to leave me? Was this some kind of prelude to divorce? The thought made my stomach churn, but it also didn't make sense. If she wanted to leave, why go through all this secrecy? Why not just say it? Mark wasn't done. There's more, he said. That Ian guy? He's connected to one of their clients. Looks like he's been involved in some kind of arbitration case recently, but I can't tell what it's about. It's all locked up tight. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed didn't make any sense. Ian wasn't just some random fling. He was tied to something bigger, something I still couldn't fully grasp. And Allison was caught in the middle of it. Over the next few days, I became consumed by the need to know more. I started following Ian, tracking his movements as best I could without getting caught. It was risky and felt borderline obsessive, but I didn't care. I needed answers, and if no one was going to give them to me, I was going to find them myself. One afternoon, I followed him to a high-end restaurant downtown. He met with two other men, both of whom exuded the same polished confidence he did. They talked for over an hour, their expressions serious, their gestures animated. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I didn't need to. This wasn't about love or passion. It was about money, power, and something far more calculated than I'd imagined. When Ian finally left, I stayed behind, watching the other two men as they lingered at the table. One of them pulled out a folder, flipping through its contents before sliding it across to the other. My curiosity burned, but I knew better than to push my luck. I left before they could notice me, my mind racing with possibilities. That night, as I lay in bed next to Allison, I felt more distant from her than ever. The woman I had loved, the woman I had trusted with my life, was a stranger to me now. And yet I couldn't let go, not until I understood the full scope of what was happening. But the deeper I dug, the more I realized that this wasn't just about her affair. This was bigger than my marriage, bigger than my family. And whatever it was, I was about to get caught in the middle of it. That night marked a breaking point. I followed Allison once more, unable to shake the feeling that whatever she was hiding was more than just infidelity. When she arrived at the office building again, I parked a block away, my chest tight with dread and anticipation. The sight of her disappearing inside left me with an unbearable mix of anger and despair. I knew I couldn't leave without answers. I waited in the shadows, the minutes stretching into hours, until she finally emerged. She wasn't alone. Ian was there, along with two other men, their conversation cloaked in hushed tones and tense gestures. The briefcase in Ian's hand immediately caught my attention. When he handed it to Allison, her hesitation was impossible to miss. The weight of the moment was palpable, the exchange quick but heavy with significance. Whatever was inside that briefcase, it wasn't ordinary. Without thinking, I stepped forward. My presence didn't go unnoticed. Ian's expression shifted the moment he saw me, his confident posture tensing into something sharper, colder. The others turned to look as well, and in that charged moment, I felt the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just about an affair. This was something larger, darker, and far more dangerous than I had imagined. Allison froze when she noticed me. Her face betrayed a storm of emotions, guilt, fear, perhaps even regret. She clutched the briefcase as though it held the weight of her survival. The tension between us was unbearable, an invisible line drawn in the air. For a moment, it felt as though the entire world had paused, the stakes of that encounter pressing down on all of us. The group's attention was fractured between me and the implications of being caught in public. Ian, ever composed, held his ground, but it was clear from the body language of the others that they couldn't afford a scene. Allison didn't say a word, and the look in her eyes told me all I needed to know. Whatever was happening here wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was far more dangerous than I could have imagined. I left that night, my head spinning with questions and dread. The sight of the briefcase, the tension in Allison's posture, and the cold, calculated demeanor of Ian and the others confirmed what I had feared. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was something deeper, more insidious. Over the following days, the pieces began falling into place. With Mark's help, the truth slowly unraveled. Ian wasn't just a man Allison had been involved with. He was the central figure in a money laundering operation that used the consulting firm as a front. Allison, through her freelance work, had unwittingly become part of their schemes, managing transactions that were anything but legitimate. By the time she realized what she had gotten herself into, it was too late. Ian had manipulated her, pulling her deeper into his operation while ensuring her silence. The briefcase from that night turned out to be the key to the entire operation. Allison had been gathering evidence for months, working covertly with law enforcement to bring Ian down. Her cooperation had come at great personal risk, and the briefcase contained the final documentation needed to implicate Ian and his associates. She hadn't told me anything, not because she didn't want to, but because the danger of exposing herself was too great. Every move she made had been calculated for her safety and ours. When the arrests happened, it all became clear. Ian and several others were taken into custody in a coordinated sting. The operation made headlines, but Allison's involvement remained anonymous. Her role as a whistleblower was essential in dismantling Ian's network, but it also left an indelible mark on our lives. The weight of her secrecy, her choices, and her betrayal was something I couldn't reconcile. Our marriage didn't survive the fallout. Although I understood the pressure and fear that had driven her decisions, the damage was irreparable. Her affair with Ian, her months of lies, and the double life she had led left wounds too deep to heal. We separated quietly a few months later. She moved to another city to start over, while I stayed with Ethan and Lily, trying to provide them with a sense of normalcy amid the chaos. The scars of that time still linger. Trust is something I no longer give freely, and I find myself constantly questioning people's motives, wondering what they might be hiding. Yet, despite everything, I've managed to keep going. For Ethan and Lily, I've held myself together, even on the days when it feels like I'm barely standing. There are moments when I think about Allison and wonder if she ever truly understood the depth of what she took from me. Not just our marriage, but the sense of security and trust one once had in the world. Her actions left a void in me that I'm still trying to fill. But I'm learning. Slowly, I'm rebuilding a life for myself and my kids, a life where we can heal and move forward. What Allison did changed me forever, but it didn't destroy me. If there's one thing I've learned from this ordeal, it's that survival is messy and painful, but it's also possible. One day at a time, I'm finding my way forward,